kasih kerana telah menonton program Sarawak Festival pada hari ini. Sertai kami pada esok hari untuk menyaksikan program-program lain yang akan berlangsung sepanjang Sarawak Festival 2021. Layari laman sesawang Sarawak Festival untuk jadual program serta maklumat lanjut. Jangan lupa juga untuk sentiasa mengikuti dan like media sosial rasmi Pustaka Negeri Sarawak di Facebook, YouTube dan Instagram kami untuk mengikuti perkembangan dan pelbagai aktiviti yang akan diadakan.
Jangan lupa bersama dengan kami dalam segmen Bual Santai Bermukul bermula pada 15 September 2021 secara virtual di FB dan YouTube Pustaka Negeri Sarawak.
Ramai dalam laga langgang, gelanggangnya ada di taman bunga. Ramai dalam laga langgang, gelanggang ada di taman bunga. Samalah sama kita lah belenggang, belenggang lah mukul Sarawak kiana. Samalah sama kita lah belenggang, belenggang lah mukul Sarawak kiana.
Hai, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera kepada semua yang sedang menonton. Selamat datang ke ceramah Sarawakiana sempena Festival Sarawakiana 2021. Izinkan saya untuk memperkenalkan diri. Nama saya Karen Injedina. Saya merupakan pembantu pustakawan di Pustaka Negeri Sarawak Sibu. Untuk sesi ceramah Sarawakiana pada kali ini, kita akan bersama dengan seorang individu yang mempunyai pengetahuan yang luas tentang Hai, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera kepada semua yang sedang menonton. Selamat datang ke ceramah Sarawakiana sempena Festival Sarawakiana 2021.
Good morning, selamat pagi everyone. For your information, our webinar today is a pre-recorded session, and to our lovely audience out there who wish to ask question, you can drop it at our comment section and we will try to answer it. I am Shahrul Baro, your host for today. Our webinar topic today is the significance of leaf within the ethnic and indigenous community. It is interesting to see how different culture at different places use the same material, which is leaf, in their daily life. We might find similarities, differences, or maybe new knowledge today. So before we start, I would like to introduce to you our moderator for today, Dr. Noseha Unin. She received her education at Illinois University with a Master in Secondary Education and Bachelor in English. Her PhD in Higher, Adult and Lifelong Education was from Michigan State University, where she conducted a study on learning to lead for Malay women in higher education. As a consultant researcher, she has won research grants for statewide studies, including for Pustaka Negeri Sarawak, Sarawak Development Institute, and Sarawak Planning Unit. As an author, she co-authored a book titled Sarawak Women in Education with the theme of lecturer from University Malaysia Sarawak. As Deputy Chairman for Pan-Pacific Southeast Asia Women Association Sarawak Chapter, she recently represented Malaysia at the 65th session of Commission on the Status of Women on Gender Equality and Women Empowerment, which was held virtually in March 2021 through the United Nations in New York. Dr. Noseha, the floor is yours.
Sorry. All right. First of all, thank you, Mr. Shahrul, the MC, for the brief introduction. And thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. So this is held in conjunction with Sarawakiana Festival 2021. So for this webinar, down or leaves in English, yeah? So it's the theme of this year's festival, okay? So in today's conversations about leaves, it does not only exemplify people's culture, people's way of life, customs and traditions, arts and history, Yeah, but also it provides avenue for us to preserve indigenous knowledge for future generation. So what is indigenous knowledge? Yeah, so it can be said that it can be traditional knowledge that is based on culture and traditions of the local communities. So what do we know about local leaves? Yeah, so in general terms, some of the local leaves have been used for arts and crafts, for traditional food and beverages, yeah, for modern and traditional medicine, for ceremonial, cultural, religious rites, and so on. So for example, if we take elephant foods, or what we call tutup bumi or tapak sulaiman, it actually can be boiled with duck or chicken or other meat to make a soup. And this is actually used normally as tonic drink, yeah? A tonic drink for treating coughs and fever. And it is also taken usually after childbirth for healing purposes. So that's one example of traditional use of leaves, local leaves. Another example, in fact, some leaves have been commonly used as daily herbal bath, especially after childbirth for postpartum care. And this is especially common among Sarawak Malays. Yeah, for instance, this is commonly used for healing and comfort. For instance, recently when my eldest daughter gave birth to her second child, I use some leaves for herbal bath. And this is usually given 3 days after childbirth. Some of the leaves that I could use are daun mengkudu, turmeric leaves, lemongrass leaves, daun limau we call it, which is lime leaves, and daun sirih. So usually people would mix between 5 to 7, and the numbers are usually odd numbers, not 4 or 6, but 5 or 7, maybe some meaning, hidden meaning behind it. So these are usually boiled in stock pots for daily bath. So the bath is usually in the morning. So the morning bath is usually going on for more than 40 days, and it has to be odd numbers as well. Sometimes it's 41 days for some people, 43 days, 45 days. So it should not be less than 40 days, but can be more than 45 days. Some people go up to 90 days, yeah, for that herbal bath after delivery. Now, this Sarawakiana festival is actually a timely opportunity for us to reflect on the significance, the significance and the many uses of leaves, especially among indigenous communities here in Sarawak. Let me have my drink. So as we know, there are 26 ethnic groups in Sarawak. So these indigenous communities are collectively called Dayaks. I think one of our speakers is in this group. So the Ibans and the Bidayu are actually the two biggest ethnic groups in the Dayak community, and they actually make up a big chunk, like 30% of our population. So other ethnic minorities include the Kenyah, the Kayan, Kedayan, Murut, Punan, Bisaya, Kelabit, Barawan, Penan. And Dayaks who live in the interior of Sarawak, they are sometimes known as Orang Ulu, or people from the interior. I think one of our speakers will talk about Orang Ulu today. So today we are very honored to have here with us 4 esteemed speakers who are experts of the field, and they will speak about the significance of leaves within ethnic and indigenous community. So first we have Dr. Werlin Jeffrey Jehom. I will introduce her shortly. Next we will have Dr. Valerie Mashman, Miss Camille Kala, okay, and then the final speaker, we keep the best for the last, Dr. Nakakatsi, I hope I said that right, known as Albert Sunny McHelsey, who will be sharing with us interesting stories about his indigenous communities. So as the moderator for this webinar, I will be guiding us through this session. In fact, this session, 2 hours, to me is actually a very short period of time to have this conversation, because this indigenous knowledge on daun or leaves are actually very interesting. So I will divide this session into 4 distinct chunks. The first 2 speakers will have about 20 to 25 minutes to present. And the next two speakers will have about 15 minutes each, followed by a round-up session of 10 minutes as a whole, okay? So let's begin with our first speaker, which is Dr. Welin Jeffrin Jahom. Yeah, she is a senior lecturer at the Department of Anthropology and Sociology, Faculty of Arts and Social Science, University Malaya. Okay, she's also the head of Indigenous Studies from 2018 till recently in June 2021, and her research interest focuses on community-driven development that includes the development of Indigenous knowledge for community livelihood and women empowerment. Okay, to share the Indigenous knowledge from research with the wider public, she has curated cultural heritage exhibitions for educational purposes, highlighting the digital polysensory exhibition concept, and has exhibited both in the country and internationally. That was since 2015 to 2018. She has also published articles in international journals and is currently completing a book on Iban Puak Kumbu weaving for a sustainable community development with Palgrave Macmillan. The floor is yours, Dr. Welin.
Thank you, Dr. Noseha. Good morning, everybody. I will just start with how I acquired the knowledge on leaves within my community, and also there's a few of the readings that I have gone through for pleasure and also for sharing in this session. Basically, my knowledge of leaves is not vast, it's only limited to certain aspect that is used in our community, because also it is not partially playing the big role in my research. So I was mainly looking at the roots, at the stem, and also at the flowers. So when you give me the title on the leaf, I was like, how am I going to go about this? And then I thought about all the leaves that has so much significance in my community. So I will mainly speak about the Bidayuh community today. And I cannot say that I am representing the whole Bidayuh community, because we have like 5 different groups of Bidayuh community in Sarawak: the Bukar Sadong, the Beperoh, Bau Jagoy, the Selako, and also the Bidayuh in Mongkos area, who basically speak different dialect, and also their usage of leaf is also very different. So I mainly speak for the behalf of the community who lives around Borneo Heights, which is very close to Kuching Airport, about 25 minutes. And then most of this knowledge that I will share today are the one that I have grown up with. Okay, so the purpose I look at this, the purpose I present it this way, because I would like to share that although it has been recorded about 608 species of medicinal plants, mainly leaves, used by 14 ethnic groups, communities in Sarawak, but we only have a very few of these leaves that actually has been utilized in our community today. And it really shows that indigenous knowledge has declining, and there is a very urgent need that we need to document this. But we have actually quite good documentations, and one of the good documentations that I have been referred to is by Han Christensen, ethnobotany of the Iban and the Klabit. I think Valerie is very well versed with this work. And then there are also a few research that has been done by Sarawak Biodiversity, and also very good documentations on the Bidayuh medicinal plants and leaves by a team of Dr. Gabriel Noweg. I believe that he was teaching at Unimas before. His team has actually produced a few very good articles. So if I would put all together, I don't think 20 minutes would be enough, as as our chairwoman was saying. So I'm going to highlight on the aspect of leaf that has been used until today, until yesterday. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a few of the older women from my community, and they were mentioning again and again the same similar leaves. And I was asking, don't you know any other leaves that we are using in our community? And most out of 12 of them, they were saying that we do not use those leaves anymore because it is very hard to go to the forest. And sometimes we don't even know which one is referring to which purpose. So it's kind of sad because this is a very important indigenous knowledge that should be passed down from one generation to another generation. And I think, and I strongly believe that the knowledge of leaf and also the usage of all of these leaves stop at the people who are at the age of 50, at my generation. Okay, because when I asked actually my cousins, my niece, nephews who actually stay in the village, if they have known certain leaves and its functions, and they don't even have the knowledge about how to use this leaf, how to identify, so it's kind of a very desperate moment that we need to document this and to share it publicly in a way that community can re-engage with all this knowledge. Yeah. Okay. So basically, in my community, leaves has been used for many different purposes, and I know that Valerie is going to use. To explain something on the basketry. So I am going to focus on the culinary tools, leaves as food wrappings, leaves as healing, and also leaves as food containers. So I still can see all of this when I go to the wet market and also when I visit a few of my relatives in a few different villages. So it's still very significant today. Like what you are seeing now, this is the kind of leaves which we call the one buan. Okay, so our in our community, it is very rice is our essential food. Everything we eat with rice. I think in other communities as well, and basically in Asia, rice need to be on the table on your plate, every day, 3 times a day. So in Bidayu community, the way we grow up, we actually eat our rice this way, and it is wrapped with 3 different types of leaves. And as far as I know, and also I have asked until today, these are the 3 different leaves that is used. And it's not just to wrap leaves to give the nice aroma, but it also has medicinal purposes. Like for example, this leaf, in Bidayu we call it the one buan, but in Malay you call it serat air. The young leaf, actually, we can eat it as a salad, if you call it in the West, but we call it ulam locally. And then it is actually very good to detox your body. So the adult leaf, you use it as a rice wrapping, or you can use it to cook like fish or meat on the grill, roasted, but it is also good for you to have it as to be eaten as salad. Yeah. Also, so these are the other 2 leaves that I do not know the name in English. And I was thinking to myself, I was asking my father, how do you say this in English? Okay. And he said, I only know the Bidayu name. So this is the problem with our community, because we live in a situation where we only know the name of the leaves in our own language. Of course, when you Google in our own language, it will not come out, So it's very difficult for me to find the scientific name, because even in other ethnic community, the name is different. And most of the books has no pictures to show what type of leaf this is. Okay, but this is, in Bidayu, we call this the word marung. Okay, like Dr. I didn't call it Nakitsi. I'm so sorry, I cannot pronounce your name. Okay, so the way we pronounce it also has a very like emphasis, like maruk, you know. So and these leaves in Kuala Lumpur, for example, it has been planted as decorations along the road. You know, sometimes I just stop by the road and I pluck some because I use it for my cooking, and also I use it to wrap my rice. But other than to wrap rice, these leaves are also very significant in a lot of rituals, because this is the only leaf that is used to wrap food and also presentations, especially during Gawai, for example. If you can see this third picture here, it according to my grandmother in the past, this is the only leaves which is allowed in the ritual. So I cannot use the one buan or the one benua, for example. Yeah. And of course, when I asked why, the significance, and she just said, that's all we know. We can only use this leaf. So it is very hard for us to understand beyond what is the usage, because our elders, they don't really share with us the reason why, as they are not allowed to speak about it. You know, we have this kind of taboos that you don't speak about it, that you just do and you show. Okay, but for the younger generations, if we don't explain verbally, we actually don't understand because of the different belief system and also different religions. So basically, if you go to Bau Jagoy area, for example, where they still practicing rituals or Gawai festival on the 1st of June or before June and after June, basically they have this kind of offerings where they actually put near the altar at the place where they not worshipping, but it's a kind of offering for the gods and goddess, for the spirits. Yeah, I don't even think that we can use the word gods and goddess, because they don't have gods and goddess, but they just calling for the spirit. So it's a bit complicated to explain in a very simple way. Yeah. Okay. So and this one is daun benua. It is coming from a big tree, and in fact, the skin of this tree can be used to make ropes and also baskets like this. Yeah. So it also it is also a knowledge that I acquired from my grandmother. So I could not find it anywhere in my readings about this one particular leaves. It is not mentioned even in the latest article by Dr. Gabriel, yeah, back in 2017. Yeah. Okay. So the second one, the other than food wraps, just to share, if you wrap your rice in this leaf, it can actually last for 4 days outside. Yeah. If you wrap the rice when it's still very hot, it can last for 4 days, and it's just become like one block of rice. And basically, that is what the people in the past were doing, because if they go to their farm, the rice need to be fresh. And nowadays, we use food containers, plastic. In fact, if we put our rice in plastic container, it can only last for a few hours, and then it started to go bad. Yeah. But for the leaves, it can last for 3-4 days. Yeah. Okay. And then the second aspect that I would like to share is leaves that has so much significance in our well-being. Yeah. And the first leaf that I put up here is called shapur, but basically in Bidayu it's called the word sesua. Okay, I remember, and it's still used until today. This leaves is used to cleanse the body. And I remember when I was given birth to my first daughter, my mother actually brought this leaf all the way from Sarawak and boiled it for me and asked me to bath with it for at least 7 days, you know, to cleanse the energy, to cleanse the sickness, pain after you give childbirth. Yeah, so I think similarly in the Malay community, they also use these leaves. Okay, but in the Peninsula Malaysia, among the orang asli, for example, they do not know this particular leaf. So I'm very surprised, as it is actually known in India and other part of the world in the tropical forest. Okay, And then the second leaf is gambir. Gambir, we should not be mistaken with the other gambir. This is gambir leaves, and the other gambir is a chunk of wood with, which has a different purpose. So this particular gambir usually is dried and chewed together with piper betel nut and together with the areca or buah pinang. It's not as local. And I remember my grandmother has like 5 different things that she put in the mixture of the piper betel nut. First, the piper betel nut, and then she will put the dry gambir, and then she put lime. And this lime is actually a kind of powder that has been made paste out from the black snail that you can find from the river that you have barbecue until it become ash. And they collect it and they put a little bit of water and a bit of salt. And that is one of the mixture. And then together with the areca or buah pinang, they chew it and then the juice will become red. And in fact, in other part of the world, they're purposely extracting this red juice in order to make colors, but it's not, of course, they don't ask everybody to chew and produce the red color. They have different kind of extractions, yeah? Okay, and gambir is also used in my community as a dye or tanning. And I have participated with my grandmother to collect these gambir leaves, and then she actually put it in a big basin and left it for 4-5 days in order it to be very black and all the leaves are rotten. And then only then she will put other leaves or something that is like rotan and make it black. So that is how we got our rotan black and natural color. So it's not from chemical dye, but it's actually from gambir. And there's another good aspect of gambir is that it is giving the anti-insect or anti-mites. And any baskets or mats that has been dyed with gambir basically can last much longer because mites and also other insects will not dare to come and eat it. And in the Iban community, for example, gambir is one of the ingredients that is put together with Morinda citrifolia that actually produce the red color if one would like that color to be blackened. And we did this actually in my last research with the Iban on the textile puakumbu and all those natural dye. But they don't really use a lot of leaves. It is only this one particular leaves that I remember they put in a mixture. Yeah. Okay. But now, if you would bring youngsters to the forest and ask them to identify gambir tree, I don't think they would be. And for me, I always confuse it with another plant which has different properties. Yeah. Okay. So this little plant here, purun tanah, we call it in Bidayu, basically has been widely commercialized in India and also in China. It is actually to take out the toxications of if you have food poisoning, for example, it takes out all the toxic out of your body. But for us in our community, basically, we would use it to treat burns on the skin. It's very simple. So you just pluck a few leaves, you just crush it this way, and you just put it on the skin. So you don't even have to process like multi-million dollars to process and to extract it. So you use directly to put on your skin. Or if you have like, how do you call it? Skin itchiness, skin disease, for example, you know, so you just patch all your body around with this and it will be gone within 2 or 3 days. It is amazing because I myself grew up in the village. Sometimes we are exposed to all these allergies and everything. And especially those days, some people have scabies, for example. Okay, so these are the kind of leaves that they use to patch. So everywhere you will see people with green patches everywhere, you know. So this is the leaves. And basically it lives by your drain, it lives around your house. And And kuchik, basically you can find it everywhere, but we don't really pay attention to it because we don't know its properties. Yeah. Okay, so another aspect that I want to share with you is these leaves here. Okay, so these are the common one that we can find in any Bidayu village, even by their roadside, in their forests, even sometimes in Kuching small forest, you would be able to find this. Melastoma is a very common plant that we see nice pink flowers or nice white flowers, but we actually do not know that it is a very good plant. If you have bleeding, if you have cuts, all you have to do is to take the leaves, you just do again, you do this way, and you just put it on your skin and it will stop the bleeding. Usually we will run to the pharmacy, take plaster, iodine, and bandage, and we wrap ourselves. But in my community, they just grab these leaves and put it until the bleeding stops. And in Bidayu, we call it the wan rusak. In fact, the fruit that you can see here, it is also very good as natural dye, especially food dye. I have tried to color my rice with the fruit, and it turns bluish purplish color, and it's very environmental friendly, because I also know that among the Malay community, in the peninsula, for example, they also use what is that plant called blue pea flower, which we call bunga telang, to color their rice to make nasi kerabu. We call it. Okay, so in fact, the flower can also be eaten, and I sometimes put it in my salad. Okay, but my mother is one of the skip generations who don't really use this inside their salad and ulam. And then she warned me that it might be toxic. I said, no. I said, it has a very good property. In fact, from the leaves, from the fruit, from the flower, and also the roots, you can use the whole plant and it grow wild. And it is so easy to grow, in fact. Yeah. Okay, so the second plant is pandan. It cut cross around ethnic groups. You know, even in India, in China, they use pandan. But one thing that we don't really know is that pandan can actually be boiled and be drunk every day to clean your body, to take out all the toxics if you have high cholesterol. So in fact, I'm very impressed in Thailand. They basically make pandanus juice, boil and then drink it with lime. Yeah. Okay, and then another one is serai wangi. So serai wangi is known to every culture in the world. But in my community, instead of using the stem that we usually put inside our cooking, or we cut it nicely to make salad and all this, we actually use the leaves. We get all the leaves and we wrap our meat and fish and we throw it in the barbecue. It is actually preserving the meat and the fish from burning. And it's much better than using aluminum foil, because aluminum foil has kind of chemical reactions. But these leaves, it gives you so much goodness, aroma. And also the stem, we usually boil it for bath if you have itchiness. And also you can boil it to drink. And usually if you have something which is very having strong smell, all you have to do is to soak them inside the lemongrass boil bath. Yeah. Okay. So another plant which is very common, which is not known to many other ethnic groups other than the Bidayu and Iban, is this plant that grow on a short tree, which is called daun dedah. So daun dedah has a lot of compound which is very useful for the body. It's not only delicious to stir fry with small anchovies and shrimp paste and chili, but it's also good to wipe it on your hands, on your face, instead of using how do you call that, using toner, you know. So it smoothen the texture of the skin. Okay, so the last one that I would like to share with you is food container. So I find it very interesting. Once upon a time, it was a big thing in my community, okay, because we cook our rice, our condiments inside this nice little monkey pot plant, okay. Not every monkey pot plant that we can use, only this particular type, green color. So if you go along Bau area, for example, you will be able to find that they are selling this very delicious sticky rice with nuts and meat in this monkey pot plant, and it's only RM1 per piece, you know. So and this food container has been used until today. Is the only one that I still can identify, in fact. And then the second one is what we call paku. Paku is actually made from the hardened branch of a sago tree that we cut, and then we actually sew it with rotan. Yeah, and it's waterproof. And I remember I was making this with my grandfather. I was like 12 or 13 years old. It was hard work because first you have to pull the branch of the sago tree because you cannot use the one that fall down. The one that fall down has started to rot. So, and then he has to cut it in a shape of a square and then fold it together. But because it's a very hard leaf, so it's very hard to fold it together, and then you sew it with rotan thread. And as you can see,
I think Dr. Welin, it's already 25 minutes. If you like to wrap up your presentation.
Okay. So I'll just say another word. So these are the food containers that is very environmental friendly, biodegradable, and all of this kind of aspect of indigenous knowledge that we can actually put out there for commercializations and good for the earth. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Welin, for that very interesting presentation, especially on the uses of leaves for food wrapping, for well-being, and also for food containers. Maybe she can add more on food containers at the end of the session when we have the roundup. But it's very interesting how the different leaves, like the whole part of a plant, from the flowers to the leaves to the stems, they're all very useful for every purposes, like to stop bleeding, to for skin burns, and for anti-mites, for everything and anything. Yeah, that's very interesting. Sorry that I have to stop your presentation at this point, but we'll give you more time at the end of the session.
Just go on and on. Thank you.
I know, that's why I said 2 hours is barely enough for all these interesting conversations. We are now moving to our second presenter, but before that, allow me to introduce our second presenter, that is Dr. Valerie Mashman. She is currently the Associate Research Fellow at the Institute of Borneo Studies, University Malaysia, Sarawak. Prior to this, she was a research fellow at the Sarawak Museum. Her research interest is actually in the field of anthropology that examine uses of basketry, issues of oral history and narratives, values, and also social change, gender and material culture, with particular focus on indigenous people of Borneo. Her PhD in anthropology actually analyzes Kalabit notions of value and change through the 3-part oral history. So this was at UNIMAS 2018. She also has contributed papers to Borneo Studies in History, Society and Culture. So more on this, I think she will talk more about the book that she has written or published. Okay, the floor is yours, Datin.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, everyone. It's really very exciting to be with you all, and I really feel very honored. My talk today is called Down, which is Leaves in Malay, Knowledge, Heritage and Identity, Orang Ulu Hats. And I'm going to focus only on 2 leaves as the theme for this talk. One is called Liquala valida, in Kalabit is known as Down Ilad, and it's a fan palm. And the other is a different type of pandanus, one with a lot of thorns, which grows as a much bigger plant. In Kalabit, it's called Down Kabar. In Kenya, it's called Down Da'a. In Iban, Koropok. And the English term is screw pine. Leaves have been very important to human cultures ever since ancient times. In Borneo, evidence of woven fibers has been found in archaeological sites a few centuries BC. And it's possible that hunter-gatherer peoples who lived there over 30,000 years ago were familiar with the weaving of fibers. I'm going to focus, as I said, on leaves made by I will focus on leaves from 2 species of plant used for the making of hats by Orang Ulu groups. These are examples of living traditions, and the people making them have been making them still over the last 10 years. I have to say that this does not do justice to the immense biodiversity of plants used by a wide range of ethnic groups for hats and basketry. And these are still very important to the people of Sarawak today. The kind of knowledge that people have of plants is very important. Knowledge transmission and ways of learning are very much under-researched. So who are the Orang Ulu? The term Orang Ulu is an umbrella term meaning upriver people, generally those who live in remote interior highland areas around Balaga, Marudi, the Tubau, Baram, and Upper Rejang rivers. Many Orang Ulu have now moved to work in coastal towns and cities in Sarawak. They also live in border areas around Bakalalan and Barrio and in Lawas. These are the Kalabit and Lumbawang, formerly known as Murut, and Penang. And other Orang Ulu are Kenya, Kayan, and Kajang. Some of these groups are related to one another. Many are mixed through intermarriage. Many groups lived in a class system before conversion to Christianity. And the symbols associated with their aristocracy are still in use in their material culture, which is varied and artistic. This umbrella term refers to 5.5% of Sarawak's population. So I just want to reflect on what is Indigenous knowledge and why it's important. Indigenous knowledge encompasses the unique skills and practices of a particular cultural society. Indigenous knowledge is passed from generation to generation, usually by word of mouth and through cultural rituals. It forms the identity of a community. And the Indigenous knowledge embedded in the process of making hats and baskets through generations is recognized today of vital importance to humanity because of the unique relationship of such knowledge to environmental sustainability, culture, and identity. So here we can see an elder from my husband's community harvesting rattan in a piece of secondary forest. He has to know when the rattan is ripe for harvesting, and this is when the outer leaf sheath is just about ready to fall off the cane. So about Indigenous knowledge and the making of hats. Firstly, there's the knowledge of the plants themselves, the identification of the plant, cultivation, perhaps in your kitchen garden, knowing the right time to harvest the plant and the processing of parts of the plant. Next comes the skill of making the hat, of putting parts together and using different fibers to make different parts. Then there's the skill in actually decorating the hat. And the knowledge is transmitted through verbal instructions or actions, is deeply cultural and very often linguistic, because the local languages have the specialized vocabulary. And here we can see some hats ready to be completed. And this knowledge and this transmission of knowledge may not be done deliberately, but it depends on a special or appropriate setting for this learning to be done. It might be transmitted across generations or through peer groups. A researcher needs to be aware that some knowledge is explained and discussed, and some is taken for granted. It is inherent and tacit and not spoken about. Different kinds of knowledge is transmitted in different ways. And this knowledge is very fragile. And the reasons for knowledge loss, according to researchers who've worked extensively in South America, are formal education, loss of language, penetration of market forces, imported technology, changes in occupation, wealth, changes in land availability, habitat change, species extinction, change in distance to town, change in distance to forest, change in religious belief, migration, travel, interethnic contact, and values change. And in this photograph, you can see a piece of land, secondary forest, has been cleared outside my husband's village, but this actually was for a solar farm, which was going to bring sustainable energy to the village. So changes are not always negative, but they bring about certain casualties. Here you can see a transmission of knowledge which is taking place between Rose, who is a master basket maker, and my husband's cousin, and Elena, our daughter. And Elena was about 15 at the time this was taken in 2004. Rose has in the picture the crown of a skull cap, and Elena is learning to make a bamboo mat. Indigenous knowledge is a communal matter associated with a family, tribe, or kinship, or other groups. I'm quoting from Rashida Bolhassan's PhD. So we can see here that deliberate, focused learning can take place through words and action. And here we can see a more social nature of learning. This photograph is taken at Datakakus with the Kenya Badang. And here in the left side, you can see a woman completing a hat, and she's talking and chatting in a social group. And I'm quoting from Davy Ball, who did an extensive study of Sarawak basketry, and she herself is a basketry maker. Learning is situated learning as a communal-placed action, as a community of practice. And here community is fluid and informal, participants going and coming as they wish. Initially, people learn on the edge. As they become more competent, they move to the center of a particular community. And here we can see learning taking place socially again, and this is with another Kenya community. And I'd like to quote here, learning is not understood as the acquisition of knowledge by individuals, so much as a process of social participation. So it's this social nature of learning that I'd like to emphasize. And I'm now coming to one of the palms I wish to feature, this Likwala valida or fan palm. You can see the leaves are corrugated and shiny and waterproof, and the young leaves are those that are harvested. The palm grows to about 2 meters in height, and its stem is thorny. It grows in lowland and hill primary forest, and it's endemic to Borneo. Near Kuching, it grows abundantly in the hill of Matang, and we've also planted it in the botanical gardens in Kuching and Reservoir Park. The leaves are used for thatch roofs, wrapping, and handicrafts, as we'll see later. And Puri's Ethnobotany Handbook is a very useful source of information. So I'm going to talk about a classic sun hat known as a ra'ong. Hats are always protective in local communities. And this one is used as protection from the sun and the rain. It's worn both by men and women while fishing, traveling on boats, as well as going to the farm. The width of the hat depends on the job being carried out. If work is in the hot sun, a wider hat is often used as it gives more shade. Hats from the different communities have different points in common. Some are flat and some are conical. On the inside, they have a skull cap, which holds the hat onto the head. And they're made by Kalabit, Kenya, Kayan, Kachang, and Penang. And here we're having a look at Rose's likwala palm that she planted herself. And here she's wearing her skull cap. As I said, she's a master basket maker. She's the only person in the Kalabit Longhouse that makes the ra'ong. She learned how to make the Kenya hat as an adult from her daughter-in-law's family. And this is an example how skills can be shared and learnt through different communities. There's a lot of fluidity and borrowing and learning between the Orang Ulu groups. So this is how the sun hat is made. Large leaves are selected and taken off the stem and dried flat. These are stored for use when needed. The brim of the hat is made by stitching dried palm leaves together. Then these are sewn together, overlapping each other and reinforced by a rattan ring. Rattan is something which is harder to obtain with forest loss. Although some groups are very active in planting it, like the Bidayu. And the rim is attached to the crown by stitching through the crown. In the old days, this shop-bought fiber was obtained and twined from pineapple leaves. If you look at this hat here, this is what we're going to be talking about soon, the skull cap, which here you can see has been lined with fabric. So I'm going to talk about bamboo because it's used for that skull cap in our village. So bamboo is widely found in secondary or disturbed forests and cultivated in villages, and it's used throughout Southeast Asia, and it's used for cooking rice, building materials, containers, and handicrafts, and its shoots are eaten. So I'm going to talk about how Rose makes the skull cap from bamboo. She carefully selects the appropriate lengths of bululong. This is not bululong in this picture though. It should not be too hard or too young. She cuts it at the internodes and takes it back to the longhouse. She processes the bamboo by splitting it lengthwise and removing the inner fiber from the outer green part. She puts the strips of inner fiber in a container, a pot, or another bamboo container to boil it in hot water until it's soft. And after the soft inner fiber has been dried, she weaves it diagonally into a cylindrical shape. Once the cylindrical shape is completed, she inserts a thread through the top, which she pulls across the top to form the crown of the hat. This is then lined with dried palm leaves to make protection from the rain more effective. And then it is lined with a layer of cloth. The hats are decorated with fabric varying in shape and style from an outer disc at the point to the whole of the outer surface. Alternatively, a beadwork panel is stitched in place by passing the needle through the entire hat. The hat is embroidered using shop-brought threads. Sometimes beads, sequins and braid and cowrie shells are added. The most highly decorative hats are saved for ceremonial occasions. So the more a hat is decorated, the greater its value and the greater its use in the community as a commodity, gift or identity marker. And they help to produce a combination of cultural building blocks. The beadwork is often symbolic and protective. These hats decorate the house as heirlooms. these are no longer everyday objects, but part of ritual, religion, and art. And some of these special hats might be used in wedding rituals. A bride's family prepare a special sun hat or series of sun hats for this special ritual to bestow protection on a young bride. The design might be elaborate depending on how the bride's family want these decorated. Sometimes in the case of a noble bride, the crown of the hat is decorated with hornbill feathers. And here you can see the Kayan Tingan Madang dance group at the Baram Regatta. So here you can see the hat is part of cultural costume. Again, this photo was taken in 2017, so this is very much a tradition that is still alive. And here you can see hats for sale at the Barrio Food Festival. And here you can see a hat used in the farm. So these hats are can be a good source of income for the women who make them. Now, I'm turning to a different type of hat. Oh, here is another beautiful array of hats for sale at the Kenya Festival in Assap in 2012. Now I'm coming on to a different kind of hat, if you like, or protective covering, the summit raincoat. And this documentation was made in 2020 under lockdown. Sina Rada Ulun is a Kalabit woman in her 70s. For much of her life, she crossed the highlands on foot, carrying a rattan backpack, kalang, visiting villages. The summit raincoat was an important item to protect her in a backpack in heavy rain. She learned how to make this from her mother. The summit is made of dried licuala leaves, the leaves we saw before, that are tough and water resistant, and it folds very neatly to fit into a basket or backpack. It was once a common item in the Kalabit Highlands. Every woman knew how to make one. And it's big enough to cover a person who is carrying a heavy load of paddy on their backs. It can easily be carried in a basket and can also be used as a mat. So I'm showing you how it's put together. You can see the leaves ready for stitching in the lower photo. The narrow ends of the leaves are put next to each other with the edges overlapping to form an arc. These are stitched together along the overlap. Stitches also reinforce the edges of the summit. Two identical sets of leaves are prepared and are put one over the other and stitched together along the widest part of the leaf and across one edge. The other edge is left open. So here you can see Sina Radu treating the leaves by heating them to flatten them. And I'm really grateful to her daughter Lucy, who was learning how to make them from her mother as she was in Barrio for an extended period. Now I'm coming to a different type of hat, the tapong da'a, which is worn by most of the men belonging to the Orang Ulu communities. It is also worn by men and women for celebrations of music and dance and public events. The hornbill feathers are considered important and signify status. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, our Deputy Speaker, Datu Grawat, is wearing a hat with 3 feathers, and he's with another community feather. Here you can see some other elders wearing a rattan hat, which is smoother with less embroidery. And here we can see Tama Grawat, who told me about the hat in 2010, because his sisters make the hat. And this is the type of pandanus that is used to make this hat. And this is a thorny pandanus with very thorny leaves. And it grows much taller than the one that's used in flavoring. And it's woody and evergreen and grows to about 5 meters. And it's often cultivated in villages, and you can find it throughout Southeast Asia. And I want to introduce you now to Oko Osun and Tama Jan Laweng, who come from Long Pulong, a Lepokov village near Longbanga in the Baram. They're very much involved in the making of these hats. And you can see Oko Osun there. She's busy drying leaves outside her longhouse, and she's wearing a women's version of the hat, and her husband Tamajan is wearing the male version. Sometimes there's a fringe at the front of the hat as well as the back. So pandanus is cultivated near farms and close to the longhouse. Old mature leaves are harvested. The leaves are cut off just at ground level, and then the leaf tips are removed. The thick and thorny edges are trimmed off, and after that the leaves are dipped in boiling water to blanch them. And then they're dried and split to the lengths required. The process takes 1 or 2 days, depending on whether the sun is hot and dry enough to dry the leaves as needed. And next, the hat is woven in a flat strip. Then the flat strip is jointed around the mold, luhan, which is made by Tamajan Lawing out of wood. After that, 7 threads of natural fiber are usually twisted from the bark of the talun tree and threaded around the circumference of the hat. These threads are then pulled to give the hat its characteristic shape. After that, the sabu or visor of the hat is inserted using long strands. A decorative edge is woven into the hat, twisting the strands of pandanus as they're threaded back and through the weave many times. Finally, these are cut, leaving a fringe. So Okosu Osun is playing the zither here, wearing the hat with other members of her community. And this is the women's version. And some Kalabit wear this hat in a different style. And here are hats for sale, so we can see that they're still used as a source of income. And here, these are hats of VIP guests. It is customary when government servants or VIP visitors visit the Orang Ulu, they experience the custom of the conferral of ethnic dress on visiting dignitaries. This might consist of hats, jackets, or beads. To the Orang Ulu, this is a means of bringing people into their own realm, creating access and opportunities. To sum up, craftwork such as basketry and the making of hats are representations of culture. The examples shown in this talk demonstrate that these traditions are alive as people make and use these items in daily life, in customs and rituals. They're a significant source of income. The skills that are needed to produce these handicrafts are not being passed on to the younger generation, whose interests are different and often technological. If we could only harness technology to help in the processing and the passing on of traditional skills, then it's possible that young people might become more interested in taking them up. More research is needed on the properties of these plants and the transmission of knowledge within communities. These hats are often of cultural significance to rituals and to identity are valued. Craft specialists need to be identified who can teach others. Technology needs to be used as a training and marketing tool. And I want to leave you with a quote from the woman who's perhaps the inspiration behind this festival, Dr. Rashida Bolhassan. Indigenous knowledge needs to be preserved and safeguarded, respected, maintained, and managed, not only because of its crucial and monetary value, but because this knowledge represents the heritage and distinctiveness of Indigenous peoples. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Dr. Valerie. That was on the dot, 25 minutes. Yeah. So what I can hear is that from this insightful presentation is that while talking about the 2 species of local leaves, giving examples of fan palm and also screw pine, and also using the examples of making sun hats, skull cap, raincoat, what is embedded or manifested in the presentation is that how these the uses of these leaves actually produces indigenous knowledge that is manifested in the verbal actions, the cultural activities, and also the linguistic aspects of it. So an important key ideas or key takeaway we can get from this presentation is that how knowledge loss, transmission of knowledge, and the social nature of learning. So these are the things that we need to pay attention to as we weave through this. So I think Dr. Valerie can mention more on this, the way forward, especially at the roundup session, okay? Right, moving on, we are to our next speaker, a very special person all the way from Canada, Miss Camille Callison. And she is the university librarian at the University of the Fraser Valley. And until recently, she was actually the Indigenous Strategist Librarian at the University of Manitoba. Okay, she serves as the chair of IFLA Indigenous Matters section, the secretary of the IEEE P2890, and she also recommended practice for provenance of Indigenous peoples' data. Yeah, she is also the co-chair of the Anthropology Repatriation Committee and as a member of OCLC Reimagine Descriptive Workflows Advisory Group, okay, and NISO Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Subcommittee. What I like about her background is that she is very committed in advancing matters related to Indigenous peoples and creating meaningful change related to equity, diversity, and inclusivity within cultural memory professions, and working on a PhD related to Indigenous knowledge, cultural memory institutions. Here you go, it's yours, Ms. Camille.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much for having us here, inviting us to be here today and to be part of this special occasion. I'm really honored to be coming back virtually to Sarawak for this event after having been a guest in your country and territory for a while. I actually wanted to speak a little bit, and I don't know why, but my PowerPoint for myself isn't working, but I did bring the star of our show here, which is Dr. Sunny Mihalski, and I wanted to introduce him. But first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about, so for some reason, my PowerPoint isn't working, but I did do a really nice one for him, which I'll load in a minute. So I'm going to give most of my time to him and his work today. But I did want to talk a little bit about plants as medicine. And so I come from the Tahltan Nation, which is located in northern British Columbia and the Yukon in Canada, and the mouth of our river is in Wrangell, Alaska. And we call ourselves the people of the Stikine River, which is Canada's Grand Canyon. So some of the leaves that we use up there for medicine are things that we call caribou leaf, which we use for medicines and for foods. We use extensively many of our balsam barks and other things for medicine. In the place where I was at the University of Manitoba, they have 4 sacred medicines, which are cedar, which you're going to hear a little bit more in depth about, and sage, which is a plant that you often see people smudging with, and sweetgrass, and of course tobacco. So often they use tobacco ties when giving to an elder to ask them to for traditional knowledge. So it's quite common in that, and I had some pictures of that, which none of them loaded today. So I think what I'm going to do is give the rest of my time here today to Dr. Sunny Mihalski, which I will share his PowerPoint now because it has loaded. So that is very important. So I will do that right now. And with that, I will ask you to introduce him and move forward with that. And I want to say thank you so much, Madhu, for inviting us here today and for allowing us to share some of our knowledge with all of you. There we go. And I don't know if you wanted to read his traditional introduction, although he is going to do one himself. So I will allow him to take the floor now.
Yeah, I think it's better that we allow him to introduce himself. Yeah.
For the pronunciation.
Okay.
Yes, especially. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay. Good morning, although it's good afternoon here. I heard everyone saying good morning, so it must be morning down that way. Thank you to my good friend Camille here for inviting me to be a part of this, and thank you all for accepting me to be a part as well. When we talk about the use of leaves, many different uses of leaves that we use, like for instance, skunk cabbage leaves are used like what the elders describe as saran wrap, because it's used to wrap our food. Stinging nettle is used for teas. Maple leaves are used for when they're doing underground cooking. Cooking wild potatoes are used as a base, and then the potatoes, and then to cover it. So it's many other uses of leaves, but we chose to talk about the cedar bough, which is kind of a leaf. But because it's, to me, it's an opportunity to actually talk a little bit more about Stalo culture and Stalo history. So that's why we picked it. And cedar is like a gift. And so my name, Nakakatsi, I'm the cult advisor and historian for the Stalo Research and Resource Management Center. I actually get my name from the picture there on the left side there. Yes, so on the left there, you can see the fellow in the left picture in the white. That's my grandfather, Antoine McKelsey. He's known as Bakupsh, also known as Nakakatsi, then became known as Meshk, was given the baptized name Antoine. And then when he was registered on the band list, he was given the last name McKelsey, which comes from his two adult names, Meshk and Nakakatsi. And so the name Nakakatsi passed down from him to my father and then to myself. And on the right side there is another one of my great-great-grandfather, Captain Charlie, or Sachil. Sachil was a grizzly bear hunter, and in my introduction, I talk about fishing at my ancestral fishing grounds, and that's where Sachil is from. And his father, my great-great-great-grandfather, Sachil, is buried at the cemetery there. And it's a well-known archaeological site, 9,200-year-old archaeological site up in the Fraser Canyon, about 150 miles out of Vancouver. Okay, so we're going to talk about the cedar tree. There's a big cedar tree on the left side there. You can see the cedar bough over the roof, the front door of the house. Okay, so then well, the origin story is a story shared by late Bertha Peters from Seabird Island, and she tells a story about a very generous and good man who was always helping his people, always being generous, giving different things to help his people out. And she said that when he had died, where he was buried, a cedar tree grew out of his grave, and it was because of that man's generosity. That's why we get so many different things from the cedar tree. All the parts of the cedar tree are used here. You can see right from the trees on the left side there, then also the cedar, right to the cedar boughs that are used on the right side there. Okay, so we'll move to the next slide here. Okay, so the trunk of the tree is used to build our longhouses. You can see the picture of the longhouse here. It's actually historic era longhouse, and it's actually during the anti-potlatch law. When the anti-potlatch law came in 1884, that banned the use of or banned our gatherings, and then we hid in a European style barn. So that's what you look at this building here. That's what we used with the steep roof on it. And then later on, once the anti-potlatch law was repealed in 1951, people continued to build their longhouses the shape, although our original longhouses were shed roof style longhouses that had the high front and the low back. And also we had the house posts that were in the longhouse. That's what you see on the left side here. This is a memorial house post that we use for our Stalo Veterans Remembrance Day ceremony. The only thing that you see missing on top is the notch. Usually there's a notch on top, and that's usually at the low side of the longhouse that supports the roof beam that goes to the front beam. And I don't have good photographs of that, but the houses and the posts come from the trunk of the tree, as well as the next slide here. Our welcome figures. In our language, we do not have a word for welcome. We use the word ikwas ami, which just means good to see you. And the language department was the one that said, well, we have to say something. So we says good to see you. But what we found, or what I found, is that in our language, welcome is done by gesture and also done by song and dance. So when people are approaching our village, they would start singing a song that's known as the Fraser River song or approach the Potlatch song. And then the people that are in the village that they're approaching would hear them, and they would come out to the beach and they would start singing together. So that's why I say welcome was done by song and then also done by gesture. So the woman you'll see in the picture here holding up both hands like this, and then you see the man holding up one hand. Nowadays, that's used as a way to show thanks and to show respect, but also in the old days is a way to show peace. So in the old days, they're just like, I have no weapons in my hands. So people on the canoe would be doing this. People on the shore would be doing this. Say, come ashore, we have no weapons as well. And so that's why I say welcome was done by gesture and done by song. And also we have the canoes, the cedar trunk was used to carve out these canoes. We have 11-man war canoe races now. In the old days, we had the shovel nose type of canoe that was used for the river that had a flat bottom, had a platform up top for spearing salmon. Not many people use those now because we have the motorized boats, but we still use the 11-man, what's referred to as the war canoe race. So that's what these people are doing. They're actually they're practicing for the war canoe race. And then also you can look at the young boy there on the right side, a paddle that's carved from the trunk of the tree. Then also you can see the small paddles that are on his paddle jacket. Those come from the trunk of the tree as well. And also from the trunk of the tree is the planks. So in the old days, our longhouses are actually covered with planks, and the planks are actually split from the living tree. But also those planks are used to make the cedar boxes. So this one here, it's a more modern box here using modern screws and modern hinges and latches, but it is still made out of cedar. And it's a box that I used for my shwokwith. My shwokwith is what I call my traditional blanket that I use for when I go to different gatherings, and I'll use my traditional blanket and also use my cedar hat. So my community gave this to me as a gift for my shwokwith, because they gave me a shwokwith and I already had a shwokwith, so I have two shwokwith. But the thing on the right there is what do you call it, like a speaker's stick, or else it's actually more a dancer stick. We have what's called the winter dance. So every winter we gather, and winter dance is basically a song and dance about a person's spirit power. And so it is our belief that when we reach puberty, we automatically get a spirit power, and the puberty ceremony is actually to get the spirit power revealed to you. That spirit power stays you for the rest of your life, protects you. Whenever you need help, you can call on your spirit power to help you. While the winter dance then is basically a song and a dance that comes from a person's spirit power. But also one of the protocols is you're not supposed to tell anyone what your spirit power is. If you tell people what your spirit power is, it starts to lose its power. And that's why if you ever look at some of our carvings or rock carvings, pictographs, pictures, that sort of thing, you'll notice that they're trying to confuse things by adding different elements. They'll add maybe the head of a bird or the tail of a frog or wings of a bird, sort of kind of trying to do a carving or something to depict what the spirit power is, but they don't want you to know what it is. So that's why you often see those different elements on different artwork. Next one. And this also comes from the cedar bark. So on the left side there's the cedar headbands. Nowadays, those cedar headbands are more used for decoration, but they actually had a purpose. And I didn't realize you guys actually see me too, but this is what we call a paddler's one. So a lot of times you see people wear them like this, but actually they're worn like this off to the side. So when you're paddling down the river, your sweat, it's like a sweat thing. So all your sweat drips down and goes down to the side there. But nowadays, when you go to different gatherings, you'll see people having these different bands. So those are cedar headbands that I received for different work that I've done in different places. Like if you're an MC, they'll give you a cedar headband, or else sometimes with this tie a kerchief around your head. And then on the right is the canoe baler. So that's made out of bark. And then of course the handle is made out of wood. But that piece of bark there has been stripped off of a living tree, and then it's bent and shaped. And then you grab the handle and you can kind of switch it across your canoe like that. Here.
Yeah.
I forgot about the little model. So this is the little model. So you'd hold it like this, and you can see how it coat through the bottom of your canoe. So you go like gather water, splash it out, and then go back the other way. Gather water, splash it out. That's a cedar or canoe baler, it's called. That's made out of cedar bark. And then, of course, the cedar hat. You can see the picture of one of my coworkers, Francine, wearing her cedar hat. And I also brought one for one that I wear. So when I go and I use my shwokas, I usually wear my cedar hat as well. So this is all made out of bark. So the bark is stripped off the tree. It's only stripped off 1/3 of the tree. We're not allowed to strip more than 1/3 because it's to preserve the tree. And nowadays, archaeologists refer to what is known as culturally modified trees, which is a cedar tree that has bark that's been peeled off like 100, 150 years ago, and you can still actually see the modification on the tree. But we still use the bark. We peel the bark. The inner bark is used, and then woven into these hats, or even the actual inner part of the bark when you first peel it off the tree. And it's right in June, like people are busy right now peeling cedar bark. And when you scrape the inside of the bark using a sharp object, you have this fine little slivers that come off. And once you let that dry, it's very soft and very absorbent, and that's what we'd use for diapers. Okay, but also what I don't have on here is rope. So cedar bark is used for rope, very quick makeshift rope. But also we have what is twine. So when we make our cedar nets for dipping salmon, and for making the big bag nets that we used to haul in between the canoes, those would be made out of cedar as well. But then, because the bark is very soft and you need it to be very sturdy, then we would also mix that with the stinging nettle. So the stinging nettle is a plant that you eat the leaves when the plant is really small, but once it grows long, and it grows up to about a meter and a half tall, and then that's when we take the inner fibers of the stinging nettle, and take the inner fibers of dog bane and take the cedar bark, mix the three of them together, roll them together, and it makes a super strong twine. And that's the twine that we use for our dip net. So that all comes from the cedar bark. And then of course we have the cedar cross pieces. So you look on the right side, barbecuing salmon there. The actual stick, that's the upright stick, is actually made out of vine maple. So vine maple, I mentioned earlier, the leaves of the vine maple is used for when we're cooking. So if we were to be cooking here underneath this fire, what we would do is take a pit, lay a bunch of vine maple leaves on the bottom, and then put a bunch of wild potatoes, and then cover them with some more maple leaves, cover them with about 3 to 4 inches of dirt, build a fire on top, barbecue the salmon like this. Oh, then also there'd be a hollowed out stick that would be placed in there. So you take the stick, you split it, take the inside out, and you put the stick inside there. And just like, corn, when you can tell when corn is ready, you can smell it. Well, the same thing, when the wild potatoes is ready, you can smell the scent of that coming out of the stick. And then when your salmon is ready, pull your salmon off, dig up your wild potatoes, and then the meal is ready. The photo on the left side there, it's actually the first salmon ceremony. So every year, the very first salmon that is caught, we have a huge ceremony where it's really important that we share that salmon with as many people as possible. And also the unused portions of the salmon, the bones, the guts, those sort of things, are returned back to the river. So at the ceremony, this big platter of salmon is brought into the longhouse. So the people are waiting in the longhouse. Food is prepared outside. put on this big platter made out of cedar, and then you can see the cedar boughs are put on there, and then the salmon is put on, and then we have a couple of elders and others walking in with the procession, and then also in front we have a couple of youth with cedar boughs brushing the way, clearing the way, because the cedar bough is actually used for warding off bad spirits as well. So you can see the cedar bough in there being used. And then we have the cedar root. So with the cedar root, if you look at the base of a cedar tree, you'll notice that there's these four roots that come out, and we're only allowed to take one of the roots because, again, the preservation of the tree, we want the tree to live, and so we only take one root. And about 1 meter away from the trunk of the tree is where we dig down, and then you hit the root. And there's that one piece that's anywhere from the thickness of your little finger to thickness of your thumb, maybe it's even thicker than your thumb. And it goes out for about 1.5 meters, and all of a sudden just a whole bunch of smaller roots kind of spread out. You can't use them because they're so small. So that one piece is what we're after. Once you pull that piece out, we take the bark off of it, and then the inside is split. And this is what this is here. This is actually split by one of our elders, the late Minnie Peters, and I kept it. I was going to make a basket out of it, but I thought, no, I want to just keep it for, so I have it hanging on my wall at home. But that's what you call the split cedar root. So once it's split and then it's sized to make it nice and even, and then you use the smaller pieces, you can notice that it doesn't split very, very evenly. So you have thick pieces, thin pieces, pieces that are very narrow, pieces that are wide. And so when you actually make the cedar root basket, you actually use the fine pieces for the coiling, and then the other pieces are used for the inside. So next slide should show the cedar root basket. So the one on the left is made by my Auntie Eva, used very much, considered to be an artifact now because it's so old. But when I was growing up, my mom used to use it for her wool. She used it all the time. So it used to have handles on the end as well, but the handles had worn off. So, and then also you can see the decoration on the side, the cedar, birch bark, cherry bark was used to put the decorations on the side there. But yeah, so that's a well-used cedar root basket. And on the left side is the other one. Oh, excuse me. The other model that I brought. And so this is just a small model of it. Okay, so it's a baby basket, right? And so that's what's in the photograph as well. So this would be a larger basket, but used for babies. And sometimes you'd have the little board in here to push down on the forehead, because in the old days, the upper class people had to push down the forehead. Okay. And now we get to the cedar bough. So all the things, so from the trunk of the tree to the bark to the roots, and now the cedar bough, we're trying to fit in with the leaf. The cedar bough is used very similar to how people upriver of us, and a lot of our people have adopted that as well. As a lot of our people now use sweetgrass and now use sage as a smudge. But in the old days, and still today, sage and sweetgrass doesn't grow in our territory. We have to go to the interior. There are relatives in the interior or north of us to get that. But so we had our cedar bough that was actually used as a smudge. And so when you look on the left side, a cast iron frying pan, a modern implement used for the smudge. But in the old days, they used to use this big hollowed out rock. We found a huge rock about this big and about this round, and it had a big bowl pecked into it. And then we found all this black charcoal inside it. And we did analysis of it, it was cedar. And so that's how we know that they used to use these boughs, because it's actually the crackling of the cedar that chases away the bad spirits. And so that's why you have to put it inside a frying pan or else inside a stone bowl. Although nowadays, if you see the cedar boughs that are laying on the blanket there, people even use those cedar boughs now to just brush people off. But in the old days, it would have been crackling. Okay, so the next photograph, I think this actually shows them. Yeah, so this shows my two sons. In no way you would call them like spiritual workers. Anybody can use cedar boughs because the power of the cleansing is in the cedar boughs themselves. So you don't have to be like a special medicine person to use them. So my two sons there on the right side, Robert and Charlie, Antoine in the background. And what's happening here is people are just leaving a cemetery. And when you're in a cemetery, there's the possibility of picking up bad spirits, or even there's the possibility of leaving part of your own spirit in there. So one of the things that we're taught is when we walk out of a cemetery, we have to call ourselves, call our spirit. And if you have an ancestral name, so when I walk out of a cemetery in my own mind, you don't have to say it out loud. In my mind, I go, come on, Nakakatsi, let's go. You don't need to be here anymore. Let's go. And that's so I don't leave any of my spirit inside the cemetery. And the same thing with tissue or any parts of you, sweat, tears, you're not supposed to drop them. You have to make sure that you use tissue so you don't drop any of your tears in there. The workers that are working, they're not allowed to sweat. So the ones that are using the shovels, doing the digging the grave and then burying the loved one, they're not allowed to sweat as well. And so anything that's like that, yeah, has to be brought back out. So the other thing is when people are leaving, and then they're brushed off with the cedar boughs. So you can see the cedar boughs being used, and the hands are both hands. And also I mentioned earlier, this is the very same way when we have processions. So the Remembrance Day ceremony where we're all walking out to where the memorial, where the ceremony is going to be, or the first salmon ceremony, wherever there's a procession there, or people that are getting named to be brought into the building and there'd be a procession there, or else a photo memorial ceremony. And there'd always be people in front with those cedar boughs, brushing the way, clearing the way, getting rid of any bad spirits that might be on the way. So in here, they're brushing any bad spirits that might be on people that are leaving the cemetery. And there is the trunk of the cedar tree. It's called a gift. And it's like a gift to us from Chape, because Chape was the man that was transformed into that cedar tree. And the word for Chape, or for the cedar tree, is actually Chapeir. Okay, but Chape was the name of the man that was transformed. So the F part kind of gives it like older and like an ancestor part to it. And so still today, when we go out and use anything from the cedar tree, we still acknowledge Chape and thank him for the gifts that he gives us. And that brings us to another thing, is that we don't pray to the tree. We pray to the spirit, or in our language, what we call the shwali of Chape. So it is our belief that anything that was been transformed like Chape, so Chape was a man, generous man, who became the cedar tree. All throughout our territory, we also have Chokweam stories that talk about ancestors who were transformed into different things, either into mountains, into rocks, into sturgeon, into salmon, into Sasquatch, into beaver, and so on. We have all these stories. And it is our belief that the shwali, or the spirit or life force of those people, is still in there. So if you look at the mother mountain that we call Chitlake, her spirit or life force is still in that mountain, and she watches over it. She watches over the river, watches over the salmon, watches over the people. But we have Tifralatsa, an ancestor of the Talpea tribe, who was transformed into stone. His shwali is still in there. We have a rock called Chetam, where 3 chiefs were given the knowledge of the written language, and they were supposed to share that knowledge with us, but they failed to do that. So when Kachels, the transformers, came back, they heaped the 3 of them into a pile and transformed them into the stone. So it is our belief that the shwali of those 3 leaders is still inside that rock. So the same thing with the cedar tree, the shwali, or the spirit or life force of Chape, is still inside the cedar tree. So some people actually leave offerings, like some people will leave tobacco, some people will leave little gifts. I was never taught that myself. I was taught by my elders to just say a silent prayer, and we always say, thank you, Chape, thank you for the gifts that you give us, and then we take whatever it is that we want to get, whether it's the bark or the root or the cedar bough, or the whole trunk of the tree, the carved canoe. That's it.
So I'm just going to stop sharing here for a second and just stop and escape.
Yeah, you still have 5 minutes. Would you like to continue from where he left?
Yeah, no, I actually was going to ask him a few questions. I just wanted to stop the share. So I hope that I did that. Can you still see my screen?
No more, just yourself.
Okay, good. Okay, so now
the screen, yes, still there.
Oh, stopping the share. Okay, so that's what I'd like to do. Okay, perfect. And then Sunny and I will talk for a minute. So I wanted to, the reason I wanted to have Sunny share with us today is because he is the expert on this knowledge. And as you notice that even it's made into jewelry. So I'm wearing my cedar bark earrings today that are connected with trade beads, which have a story of their own, which showed up that we would trade, and that we would get these important trade beads, which are actually was a sign of wealth on the northwest coast. So the cedar to us is, in the way that I learned it, is that it also protects us too as well. So when we're wearing cedar, I've often worn, I have 2 pairs of cedar earrings, one small, these ones are quite large, but that I often wear when I travel, because it's a protection form when I wear those cedar earrings that were gifted to me for protection. So there's a few things that we use, and I think it's really important because I'm in Stalo territory that I would talk with a traditional knowledge holder from this territory. So I think that that's very important, that we acknowledge the traditional territories and the ancestral territories that we're on to be able to do that. Of course, the cedar is a great gift, not only to the people in the Northwest Coast, but many of the inland people. And we had only had cedar in the very bottom of Teltan territory up in BC. So we were grateful for that, but it was a smaller cedar. So we often would have good trade relationships with people on the coast that had bigger stands of cedar. And much like the people in Sarawak, they are, there's been a huge outcry against the logging of some of these, the only ones that are the original stands of our cedar. And I'm not sure if you have seen on the news recently, but many of the trunks are bigger than semi trucks to be able to haul them. They're huge to be able to haul the cedar, and they're deforesting it, which is changing our environment, because the cedar not only is important for all of these uses, and as they use them, they didn't kill the tree. But the cedar is also important to shade our streams that then give the salmon come back every 4 years, and that's where they lay their eggs. And without the boughs of the cedar across those rivers and streams, then the rivers and streams are too hot. And I'm sure you've seen that we've had even a whole community burn up this last week here in British Columbia because of the heat wave and due to climate change. And when the streams are too hot, then the salmon eggs will not hatch new salmon to move forward because the streams are too hot for them. So there's a lot of intertwining of how the environment is interconnected with this beautiful gift of cedar. And that's what we wanted to talk about today. And I just thought it would be best to bring a living library and archive here for our discussion, who has studied this. So I wanted to ask Sunny to talk a little bit about the interconnectedness with some of the issues that are going on with logging in some of the salmon areas, just for a few minutes while we use up our time.
Okay, sure. Just before I talk about that, one of the things I wasn't able to include was photographs of masks. So this is a little carving, a little pendant of a mask, but we do have what's called a Schweifei mask, and it's really protected. Like I talked about the winter dance and the Schweifei, because they're so protected, we're not allowed to take photographs, not allowed to record it. We're not even allowed to draw pictures of it. But the Schweifei mask dance is really important to us. And in the past, we had more than the Schweifei mask dance. But one of our elders talked about how the priest called everyone up to Yale, had a big bonfire, and everyone told everyone to bring their regalia and bring all their masks along. They thought they were going to have a big celebration with their masks and their dancing and stuff. But when they got up there, he had a bonfire on the beach, and he told them to all throw their masks into the bonfire. So that's how a lot of our masks were lost. With the logging, of course, that's one of the very first things that happened once contact had come in. And now the best places for collecting cedar, all those places are gone. So it's really kind of forced us to the hills, to the mountains to gather. Because when you look at the collection of cedar, especially cedar root, the best root is on the flatland, on the floodplain. We have the nice even soil, you don't have any big rocks in there. So then you get the nice straight roots, right? And then the best place to gather cedar bark is on the hillside, because when you peel the cedar bark, once you start pulling it off the tree, the bark starts going up, and then pretty soon you can't reach it anymore. So it's best that if you're on a hillside, you kind of walk up the hill. And because of all the logging, again, one of the things that we've recently done, Ministry of Forest actually did it for us. We asked them, we thought, well, it's worth a try, because there's this one area where we had the culture modified trees that were recorded as being protected. And we said, well, what about the trees that can be used for gathering cedar bark? There's a whole bunch of trees there on this hillside. That's an awesome place to do that. And they actually allowed us to protect it. So it is protected. And there are also other places too where old growth is being protected. Like one of the things they finally realized probably about 10, 15 years ago, the importance of the old growth trees. And so they came up with a strategy that's called the old growth management areas. And so they came, and of course, they had a consult at our land office, and they brought along a map with them and showed us the places that they wanted to protect the old growth. But one of the cool things is that they were actually had a map drawn around the men's fasting ground, because we have the women's fasting ground and the men's fasting ground. And because there's a bunch of old growth trees in both areas, sadly, the women's fasting ground was clear cut logged about 10 years ago. But the men's fasting ground, because it's on top of a mountain and there's all these old growth trees, because of that ogma, they protected that area. So we were pretty happy about that the men's fasting ground is protected, but also pretty sad that the women's fasting ground was logged out by helicopter, because it was up on a steep bank, thinking that it'd be protected up in that area. But helicopter logging, they were able to extract all the trees right from the middle of where the woman would camp. So all that logging, of course, is still ongoing, and many different bands, because of the legality of them having to consult with us, many of our bands, are still looking for ways to try to protect the cedar tree, or even to access it, to continue carving our canoes, or even for housing purposes. We made all our houses out of cedar in the old days, but now we have to buy lumber, and it just doesn't make sense that it's so ridiculous that we have to go buy lumber to build our homes when we should be able to have access to those trees out there.
Thank you so much for that extra explanation, Dr. Mihalski. And I think that that really covered a lot of the work that he does as well too, in consulting, trying to preserve knowledges as well as some of the work that he's known for is working on the atlas for his community with all of the place names, documenting all of this knowledge. And also to bringing back some of the language when it comes to the place name. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the atlas that you were involved in that documents.
Yeah, so in the year 2000, we produced what's called a Costalico Salish Historical Atlas. And my main involvement in there was actually recording the 725 place names that are in there, right from Vancouver all the way up to Yale. And in fact, I operate what is called Bad Rock Tours. So Bad Rock Tours comes from the name Bad Rock actually comes from Simon Fraser, the very first European that came into our territory back in 1808. Because he came from the sunrise, and that's where the Chalsa transformers went when they left our country. They went towards the sunrise and were never seen again. Because Simon Fraser came downriver from the sunrise, many of our ancestors thought that he was Cachals returning. So they actually brought him to these scratches on the rock at Yale. If you ever read the journal, he talks about that. They brought me to these rocks, showed me these scratches, and asked me if I made those scratches. Right, so our ancestors are thinking that's who he was, and then they told him the story, because Cachals, the person that actually did the scratches, who was the transformer, actually transformed an Indian doctor, Chalcalamus, into that large rock in the middle of the river there. This big rock called Lady Franklin Rock. It's the English name for it, but we call it Chalcalamus. And he was transformed because he was using his power as a way to get rich. Because when you have spiritual power like that, you're supposed to help your people, and you're not supposed to get rich from it. But he was trying to get rich from it, so that's why he was transformed into that rock. So that's where I get the name Bad Rock Tours. So I do 10 different tours where I share. Like the longest tour is about 7 hours long, called the Upriver Tour. It starts in Chilliwack, goes all the way up to Yale and back. I talk for 7 hours nonstop about all the different place names, 120 place names, 5 stops. And then I do a tour right in Vancouver in Surrey, actually, where it's nothing but city, but still people are interested in what was there before the city. So I have a 3-hour tour that I do down in Surrey, and I do a tour up to the Chilliwack Lake, do tours on the Harrison Lake, the old Sumas Lake, tours to the residential schools, the St. Mary's Residential School in Mission, and also the Kokolitsa Residential School in Chilliwack. I do tours to those places, and as well as the old village site known as Chethelath, which is where Chelchalis is from, is a village site that belongs to my community of Shohamel up in the Yale Canyon. And it's an old archaeological site, with pit houses, longhouses, rock, platform rock that the Shwalam or Indian doctors used to use to work on their patients. And of course, all the rock fortification walls that are up there as well as part of protecting the site. A lot of interesting history that's the best way to share that culture and history is by taking people out on the land and sharing those things with them.
Well, thank you so much. I raise my hands to you in gratitude for being with us today. And I say Madu Cho in Teltan in my language to say thank you from my innermost being for sharing your knowledge with us today and for being with us here. And so with that, we'll just turn it over back to the organizers and say thank you to you for your attention and for inviting us to be part of this gathering.
Traditionally, I would say lahai, which means I'm finished, and the people listening would say haichuk, meaning you're finished. So lahai.
Haichuk.
Oh, wow. That was very interesting and very insightful and very, much to learn about the cedar tree that is a gift to the community. And it's very interesting, especially the part on where Dr. Nakakatsi mentioned about the cedar bore as spiritual cleansing. To me, I've heard the term like spiritual sanitizer, so yeah. So it's interesting to see some of the young generations are also engaged in these practices. Unlike what Dr. Wellin was saying, some of these young people, it's difficult to convince because of the unknowns, because of the limited explanations, for our young generations. I think I would like to hear more about that. How is it that the young people are equally engaged in and participating in that notion of spiritual cleansing, especially when they're out of the cemetery and and it's understood that you're not allowed to leave any sweat or bring back anything that you're not supposed to, especially some bad or unknown energies.
Yeah. I think what it has to do with is because before I learned all this stuff, like I had to learn this in the last 36 years interviewing elders. And I felt before I started this job that, and the elder actually talked about it, saying that we have a big hole in our heart. And why do we have a big hole in our heart? Well, because of the residential school experience. All the culture was beaten, the language was beaten out of our elders. The assimilation policies of the government, taking away our land, all these different things that was happening. So it left a big hole in our heart. And, so we're all searching. We're on our own personal journey of self-discovery, right? We're all trying to find out what our culture, what our history is, and trying to fill that hole in. And I know the younger people, I've expressed that or talked about that to the younger people, and that's how the younger people feel. And I see, though, too, with a lot of the work that I do, like I talked about the Stalo Salish Historical Atlas. We also have a book that's called You're Asked to Witness, another one now it's for grade 10, 11, and 12. And we did a book for grade 4 that's called I Am Stalo that actually features my daughter, Catherine, in there when she was in grade 4. And then a Stalo Salish Historical Atlas. And then there's 3 or 4 other books that we published since then. But I think the opportunity is there. And I think that's what strikes the interest of the youth. And the youth are always, there's protection that we have for the youth, but also at the same time, there's things where we try to make sure that they're involved. Like I talked about the first salmon ceremony. So when the bones are returned to the river, we have one of the leaders, an elder, a spiritual person, and a youth and a youth is 4 to 7 years old. Make sure that someone, the youth, does that, right? And same thing when we had the two political organizations come together back in 1994, and how they marked that was they picked a youth, a young boy and a young girl. And my son was actually one of the ones, was the young boy that was chosen, and they gave him the name Statiluk, and the young girl was Statia. And they were kind of to represent the unity of the two political organizations coming together. And of course, there's all these other protocols as well that's involved in protecting children. They're not allowed to be outside in the dark. They're not allowed to be out, even when the sun goes down, they're not allowed to be out there. And there's a story about Thachia, a cannibal woman in the old days, who used to have a big basket on her back. When the sun went down, she'd walk down the river and grab the kids and put them in their basket and bring them back home and cook them and eat them. You know, so that's why children today, there's still families that do that. I have a cousin who's really adamant with your children. That sun goes down, you're in the house. You're not allowed to be outside after that, right? So there's all these different protocols. Children aren't allowed to be there at a spiritual burning. When we are burning food for our ancestor spirits, children aren't allowed to be there. Children aren't allowed to be in a cemetery. Children aren't allowed to be where in the same room as the deceased person. They're not allowed to be there, right? So there's all these protections that are there for them. And I think that really kind of helps in the sense that because they're not allowed to do that, I think that leaves a lot of, you know, the big hole in their heart, right? So then later on, when you start getting older, they need to start learning about it, and then that starts filling in that hole. And I think that's why there's such an interest out there, plus the opportunity that they have with the different books and the different things, that language is being taught in the schools now as well as those books that are out there.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nakakatsi. I like the way you respond by using a hole in the heart and the sense of self-discovery. I think this is a good way to sum up that presentation on the understanding among the youth. So we are now left with the final 10 minutes for the roundup. So I'd like to go back to Dr. Wailin for your unfinished stories. Now the floor is yours. Go ahead.
I have lots of stories to tell if we have the whole day. Okay.
No, right?
Yes, I would like to thank Dr. Naksas. I'm so sorry.
Nakakatsi.
Yes, your story reminds me of my grandfather's stories. You know, when he was still alive, he loved to tell us these stories, which is not inherited by my father. My father cannot tell his grandchildren all these kind of stories because he was not in that kind of generations that embrace the traditions of the Bidayu and would like to be the master to pass it down. I cannot blame our community because it is actually the Christianity belief and values that has replaced all these old traditions. You know, like the church and the pastors always remind us that we should not mix our tradition with Christian values, and it has impacted our life until today. Even the usage of that the paku as food container, for example, only in the last 5 years that I started to see my community started to relearn and started to be curious about all these traditions, because it feels like we do not have anything that we attach to as our identity. You know, like for me, for example, at least I can still say that I speak the language. I also speak the other languages of the Bidayu. If I go to Bau, I speak that language. Except for Serian, I forgot it. I was there studying in my primary school, and I was able to speak Bukar Sadong up to my 12 years old. But then I forgot about it because I started to learn the other dialect of the Bidayu. So until recently, the food container, the paku, you know, like it is only known to the people of my age or above. I'm 51, so you can imagine the gap of my age with the younger generations now. So they have not even seen it. Like Shahrul was mentioning to me that he has not seen one. Even my niece, my nephew, they have not seen it. And the last time I saw it was used in the public gatherings was when I was 16, 17, many years ago. And that was the time when Christianity is very strong in the village. Anything that is related to tradition, to rituals, okay, because paku was also used to be used to replace human bowl, they call it. Like human bowl is referring to the ceramic, the plastic, the zinc, you know, the animal bowl that we use in the kitchen. So paku is seen as temporary, and it is used to be the plate to offer during gawai rituals, and this I remember very much. And then, but my grandfather, he was forced to be baptized, but he was never Christian in his heart. So his heart like has a big hole. So he was discovering all this knowledge, this lesson. So he managed to show me a few things that all these traditions, it is not actually the opposite against Christianity, because it is biodegradable, it's environmental friendly. So that's what I gather now. So the food container that we see now is started to come back because people realize if I use this material culture, it will not actually influence my spiritual and my faith in Christianity. Yeah, I stop there.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very interesting and powerful way to elaborate on that sense, how the curiosity, you know, that sense of urgency for you to relearn and to identify and attach with your identity. So that's very interesting. And I like your backdrop, all those baskets, though. Yeah, from the, yeah. Let us have a quick tour. Oh my. Tambok, is it? Is that a tambok? Uh-huh.
Actually, all this basket I collect from different ethnic groups.
Uh-huh.
Hang on. This come all the way from Madagascar, and they use Madanos leaves. Yeah, so it's really beautiful. So I work with small group of women in Madagascar because they send to me every year 7 kilograms of wild silk harvested from the worms that eat tea leaves. So the silk is like very dark color, and I send this silk to the weavers in Kapit in Sarawak to weave a beautiful shawls using natural dye from the roots and from the stem of Morinda citrifolia, which we know as mangkudu, and also a few other leaves.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Waylin. I mean, there's so much we can talk about this, but time is of essence. We only have 3 more minutes for Dr. Valerie. I think she has a very powerful message from today's presentation. Go ahead, Dr. Valerie.
Okay, thank you. This has been a wonderful platform, and I hope we will have more opportunities for sharing with our friends from British Columbia, involving more Indigenous people from Sarawak, particularly elders and craftspeople, because there is so much for us to learn from one another. Our forests, our plants are fragile. We need to create opportunities for sharing knowledge and technologies relating to our plants and our forests. And we need to work with linguists, with people interested in digital technology to create opportunities for learning in the new ways that would appeal to the younger generation. And I hope that we can establish a committee or groups of people that can take this forum to bigger places. That's all I'll say for today. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Valerie, for that. I think I must applaud Pustaka for this effort. Hopefully this little effort that we put together today will become a way to move ahead with the with the ways to, to document and also to share and to continue the conversation, continue the discussion, and continue documenting this indigenous knowledge. I think with that, I leave to the MC to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator Dr. Nuseha, and all the speaker. I would like